Hi, Mike Brandley, auctioneer here. I want to talk to you today about topics including disclaimers, selling property as is, and the buyer's right to inspect, or as has been suggested, they have no right to inspect. So first of all, what's a disclaimer? Well, a disclaimer is distancing yourself from liability. I own a restaurant, you come in, I have you sign a disclaimer that if you get sick eating my food, I'm not responsible. That's a disclaimer. I'm waiving responsibility. I'm not sure a restaurateur could actually do that. But nonetheless, you get the point. I'm not responsible. It's been suggested that auctioneers can sell property, and there's probably not an auctioneer in the United States, there might not be an auctioneer anywhere, that has never said the words as is and where is. As is, in the condition it's in. Where is, where it's located. And our question that I hope to answer today is, can an auctioneer sell as is and where is, and not give the buyer any chance, any opportunity whatsoever to inspect ahead of time? I'm going to reference the material I printed out. I've got it right in front of me. I want to make sure I get the wording right. I ran across an attorney, Richard Stem. Richard specializes in small business, copyright, patent, and trademark issues. He's authored many books, including, most notably, I suppose, the Patent, Copyright, and Trademark and Intellectual Property Desk Reference. He's not hard to find online, answers questions online on several different forums. He's an attorney at law. And he wrote an article about disclaimers. And in fact, Richard even says, and I'll quote some of it. You're about to buy a car, and the owner tells you he's selling it as is. I get that. I understand that. I sell cars, and we sell them as is. So you're buying the car in whatever condition it's in. You, as the buyer, suddenly feel uptight. What is he hiding? A missing gear shift, faulty brakes, a dead body in the trunk? A century ago, all purchases were as is, and the buyer had an obligation to seriously inspect. Wait a minute, inspect. Yeah, and the buyer had an obligation to seriously inspect every purchase before making it. The age-old legal rule was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Well, in the 20th century, laws were enacted to protect consumers, including laws requiring that goods and services be merchantable and useful for their intended purposes, known as an implied warranty of merchantability. And as Richard points out, this implied warranty does not apply when property is sold as is. And are you ready? Are you making notes? If you have something to write with, I invite you to write this down or save this video for future reference. Because our attorney here, Richard Stem, attorney in New York, says, and I quote, and as long as the buyer had a reasonable opportunity to inspect the property beforehand. What? A reasonable opportunity to inspect? The as-is buyer takes the goods in their current condition and cannot complain about problems later. Let me read that again. Let me just make sure we've got the premise here. As long as the buyer had a reasonable opportunity to inspect the property beforehand, the as-is buyer takes the goods, takes the property, in its current condition and cannot complain about problems later. So let me see if I can do some deduction here. I wonder if you sold as is and you refused to provide any reasonable opportunity to inspect, would Richard Stem think that maybe the buyer could complain about the property's condition? You come to buy the car. I didn't let you inspect it ahead of time, and you're buying it as is and where it is. Now, of course, someone's going to argue, well, then, if you don't like the terms, don't bid. Well, fine. If you're an auctioneer and your terms are such that nobody wants to bid, good luck with that plan. But you're selling cars as is and where is. And the buyer has no chance to inspect. Buyer and calls you up. Calls you on your phone or your cell phone. You're standing on the lot. He says, hey, can I come down and look at that car? I'm interested in bidding on it. Nope. No inspection. Sorry. Well, I'm just down the street. I'm a block away. I just need five. Nope. No inspection. No right to inspect. You cannot inspect this car. And again, he has a choice whether to bid or not, but let's just say he bids and he buys and he comes down to the lot to pick it up. Isn't it ironic? You couldn't let him in to inspect the car, but you sure can let him in to pick up the car and pay for the car. And it doesn't have brakes. He says, well, I wouldn't have bought this car if I didn't know it had brakes. You didn't say anything about not having brakes. What's the auctioneer saying? Well, you bought it as is where it is. Well, yeah, but I wouldn't have bought it had I had a right to inspect it. I don't think I can read this enough. As long as the buyer, this is not me talking, this is Richard Stem talking, an attorney in New York. As long as the buyer has a reasonable opportunity to inspect the property beforehand, the as-is buyer takes the goods in their current condition and cannot complain about problems later. Would seem to me a reasonable deduction would be if you sell as is and there isn't any right to inspect beforehand, that the buyer would have a right to complain. Why would Mr. Stem here write such a phrase unless there was a difference between the right to complain with inspection versus the right to complain without inspection? And I can answer that. Because there is a difference. If you give them the opportunity to inspect, if you give them the chance to inspect, a reasonable opportunity to inspect, then you can hold them to an as-is standard. And I'm not saying that they have to take advantage of the inspection. I'm saying that you give them a reasonable opportunity to inspect. You want to sell property as is and where is. Quite frankly, so do I. We sell cars at auction. I've sold cars at auction for 22 years. We sell them as is and where is. But what do? We have an inspection period the day before. We have an inspection that morning. We have an inspection during the auction. Because we want to be able to hold people to the as is. We don't want them complaining. And lastly, complaining, the word complain. What is complaining? What can complaining become? You sold me this car as is. You didn't give me a chance to come down and inspect it. You said I wasn't allowed to inspect it. No opportunity to inspect. And now I see it doesn't have brakes. Let's take a $4 million ranch that you're selling at auction as is and where is, and I don't have a chance to inspect. First of all, I'm probably not going to bid on it. Secondly, I'm probably going to think you're hiding something. Third, you probably are hiding something. And fourth, if I buy that and I find problems with the minerals or a problem with an oil spill or an EPA or a brownfield or something out of whack, what am I going to do? Complain? Here's what happens as asset values increase. Complain becomes a letter. A letter becomes, I'm going to hire an attorney. Hire an attorney, I'm going to see you in court. We're going to litigate this because you sold this property as is, and you didn't give me any chance to inspect. So hopefully that sheds some light on my long-standing contention. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court case, Mottram v. United States, one of the mitigating circumstances was Mr. Mottram had a chance to inspect that garlock packing, so he was held to an as-is standard. Did the Supreme Court say you can't sell as-is without inspection? I don't suppose they said that specifically, but would it make sense? Let's go back to our original question here. Can you sell as is without giving buyers a reasonable chance to inspect? Yes. What right does a buyer have to complain if you sell as is and they feel like you haven't disclosed material issues or harmful issues or material issues? Do they have a right to complain? They do have a right to complain. So, you want to sell as is? I want to sell as is. Let's give people a right to inspect ahead of time. They don't have to take advantage of it, but let's give them a right, opportunity, reasonable opportunity to inspect. Mike Brantley, auctioneer. Pleasure to be here with you today. Have a great day and stay safe.